John, this is the first podcast we've ever had where we're talking about a game. And it's a game that can be brought to business. It's a game that can be brought to friends. It's a game that can be brought to family. And it has value in every one of those places.
Absolutely. Today we're speaking with Jed Lazar from Cozy Juicy Real. And it may not be what you think. As Rich said, it's a game, but it's a game you can bring into your workplace, a game you can bring into your home to really teach people how you can ask proper questions to have people feel cozy, get them a little into their juicy parts of their lives and their values, what they really stand for, and then get real and don't be afraid to ask those tough questions.
And I really enjoyed the part of this towards the end, maybe the last third of, I enjoyed the whole podcast, but the last third of the podcast where Jed even asks us a couple of real questions, and we went there. And it was actually proof of how the game works to create connection. Here's Jed.
Today's episode is being brought to you by Financial Wing. Are your company's financials keeping you up at night? We all know that today's small to medium-sized businesses often overlook the fundamentals of accounting and financial operations. Our friends at Financial Wing can help with everything from bookkeeping, monthly closing and reporting, budget planning, and much, much more. Financial Wing's reliable and professional approach will quickly build your trust and turn your finances into an asset versus a liability. Go to financialwing.com/EU for your free 30-minute consultation and see what they can do for you.
Hey, Jed, welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you on. The name of your company, Cozy Juicy Real. If somebody just looked at the name and they were like, I wonder what this guy does. The name of his company is Cozy Juicy Real. I doubt people would actually guess what you do. Can you talk to us to right off the bat on why did you pick that name? And if that leads into what you do as a company, that would be fine.
Okay, great. So we had a hell of a time naming Cozy Juicy Real. And at the end of the day, we literally came up with thousands of possible names. If you can imagine us and friends and family members sitting around a dining room table brainstorming, we made a list of our 20 biggest fans and we messaged them with our top ideas. And we'd been going by Cozy Juicy Real as a default name. We had nothing else to call it. And we said, what do you all like? And we let them choose the name. And that's what we went with. It is a problematic name for sure. Especially the juicy part, because there's all these funny connotations. People, juicy, is that like is it like a sexy experience? What about it is juicy? So it's problematic, and we've probably lost a few customers from it, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, the reason it's called Cozy Juicy Real is because, and you know this because you experienced the game, Cozy Juicy Real. There's 3 core decks to the Cozy Juicy Real experience. And the experience is about vulnerability, authenticity, and really about deep connection. And those 3 decks are the names of them, Cozy, Juicy, and Real. So that's how it's stuck over the years, despite being, in my opinion, a pretty bad name for a company.
That's hilarious. It reminds me of, there used to be a store in the city I grew up in, and the name of the store was This Is Nuts, and they sold popcorn and nuts. And that was how their name came up, is the wife of the guy who wanted to open it said, "This is nuts." And he went, "That's exactly what we should call it." Like, you sat around with your family, they say Cozy Juicy Real. You're like, that's what we should call it.
Yep. No, This Is Nuts is actually a good company name.
As you said, I have experienced what you created. Can you describe, before we get into what is it, can you describe what's the problem you were trying to solve when you created this?
Problem we were trying to solve was the ease of inauthenticity. It's so easy, even for Sophia, my co-founder, even for me, even for people who have a high value for deeper connections and authenticity. It's just so easy to stay at the superficial level. And so the problem we were trying to solve was the ease of inauthenticity. And we wanted a way for ourselves, first and foremost, to be able to go deep with people in a way that felt natural. We didn't want to be the people that shows up at the gatherings. Hey guys, who wants to play a conversation deck, or who wants to answer a deeper question? We wanted to be something that would help people take their defenses down and just open up naturally. And that's how we came up with the idea of making it a game. And that's how we came up with the whole mission ethos of what we do.
Cool. So you mentioned conversation deck, and I'm looking over here on my bookshelf. Give me 1 second. And I've got these things that are like family table topics. Have you heard of table topics?
Yep.
Yeah, hang on. I've got another one that is gratitude table topics.
Ooh.
Giant, teeny, tiny table topics. 5 senses table topics. So when I do a Valentine's dinner with my daughters, and I take them out one at a time, I usually take these with us and we play around with them. And I get some of the reaction that you talked about. Hey, we didn't want people that just pulled out these decks and started asking about things. I wanted to turn it into a game. Why is it not enough to just grab one of these decks? Why turn it into a game versus the problem you were trying to solve is somewhat solved in some of these decks that can be purchased at Target, but you created a game. You felt the world needed a game and not just the deck. Why?
Okay, first, the decks are great, and I own some of them, and I think they're fantastic. In my book, there's a few things that you can do that decks don't achieve. And we started by prototyping and learned some things early on that really influenced the whole path that Cozy Juicy Real has gone on. So some of the things we learned are that just like when you meet somebody for the first time, you don't ask them a deep question off the bat usually. That's going to freak them out. Yeah?
Yep.
So there's a warm-up period. There's a reason.
Although John and I like to do that just for entertainment purposes, but it's not great.
Okay, great.
It doesn't go over very well too.
Maybe later we can go over some of your favorite start them off and freak them out questions. But that's what you can do. And so there's a reason for small talk. There's a purpose and a place for it because it warms up the conversation and you can touch into where people are willing to share. And then you can follow that thread and hopefully go someplace that's more interesting. When you have a full game experience, we have Cozy, which is the way the game starts. Everybody starts with a Cozy question, and that's a chance to answer questions that are easy to answer. There's very low emotional risk. So people are gaining trust in each other, and they're gaining trust in the game experience, and you're building a container of trust with the Cozy deck. Then you move around the board a little bit, and now you get a choice. You can stay at Cozy, which is just fine, or you can get juicy and share a little bit more about yourself, and you get more points. And then eventually you move around and you can get real if you want to. So it's all based on choice. So what a game allows you to do is to stack vulnerability in a way that people can choose to go there when they want to. And you can have this warm up period as well. And then if you remember from the experience, we have this a whole other element of the cards, which some people say this is really the sauce. This is what makes Cozy Juicy Real Cozy Juicy. And that's the interaction cards, the purple cards. And so there's just things you can do with a game that are more nuanced and that create a deeper container, a deeper sense of trust that most of the card decks that I've played can't get to. Like I said, I love them. If you're a card deck creator and you're watching this, please keep doing it. But I think there's some things that you can do with a game that just that make it a full hour-and-a-half experience where you're suddenly having a conversation that you're going to remember 5 years in the future.
Why, Jed? Why were you driven to solve this problem? The problem of the ease of inauthenticity. Kids play kick the can, and you can't go buy a really good can at Target. The world could probably use a can for kick the can. There are all sorts of things you've done. There are all sorts of games you could have created. Why this? Why are you driven to solve this problem?
It's a great question. And I've asked myself that a bunch of times over the years. And I think if we look back on our lives, I think you guys can relate to this. Anything that you've done that you've really stuck with over the years it probably doesn't just hit one of your values. It probably hits 2 or 3 of your major values. And that's what's made it something that you've really committed to and you've stuck with over the years. And so the answer for me is a few different things. The first one for me is a sense of adventure. I love being in a place where I don't know what's going to happen next. I love travel. I love going on mountaineering trips and backpacking trips and hiking with friends because I'm suddenly in situations where I have no idea what's going to happen. And those experiences of adventure can be hard to create in an urban environment. And so for me, connection, human connection, and the surprises that can come out of that and the depth of experience that can come out of that is it hits that ticks my adventure box in a really big way. And so that's juicy for me.
Yeah. Jed, I want to bring us maybe back a few steps. You and Rich had a chance to have a couple of experiences together. I haven't. And I'm going to guess that most of our listeners, if not all of them, haven't either. And so I want to bring us back to, okay, I understand cozy, juicy, real now more in this first few minutes than I did way before we started. I wasn't exactly sure what it meant. And I understand the cozy types of questions you can ask and the juicy and how you can get the real questions and how that creates a sense of connection and surprises and a whole bunch of things that feed your adventure. I get all of that. But then you also talked about a card game. And I know you went to speak with maybe one of Rich's companies, but I'm not exactly sure if I'm connecting all of the dots. So I want to just connect some dots here for myself and our listeners. Give me your background very specifically, not the company's background, your background, please, if you can.
My background is I was raised in Utah. I lived in Portland, Oregon for 10 years. I'm calling in from Valencia, Spain, where I live now. I've got an MBA in sustainable business. I had an organic soup business in Portland, Oregon for 10 years. One of my big influences has been men's groups, Mankind Project specifically. And I'm a trained coach and facilitator. And the company, Cozy Juicy Real, is run by my wife, Sophia, and I. She and I came up with the concept together and developed it together starting in 2016 as a passion project, really. We both had our other gigs that we were doing. And then in 2019, it got to a place where people were saying, how do I get this? And that's when we took it more seriously and quit our jobs.
Love it. Get what? How do I get exactly what? Is it get your coaching? I get you to come do a workshop with our company? Is it, do we get the game? Is there a game here that I'm trying to understand? So what is the coaching exactly that you provide? What are the types of services you provide? If you'd boil it down to here are the 3 or 4 things we do.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question. I think the easiest way to say it is that we do 2 things. We host online events that help communities and teams create trust.
Okay.
Yeah. And we use Cozy Juicy Real, the board game, during those events. So we host online events for teams all over the world. So people join. Sometimes it's just 10 people. Sometimes it's a few hundred people. We teach them how to play the game. And we open up breakout rooms and people get to have these experiences of meaningful connection in breakout rooms with groups of 5, 6, 7 people. And then we do a debrief at the end. So there's coaching elements involved, but in large part, the game, Cozy Juicy Real, facilitates itself. So that's a big part of what we do.
Okay.
And then we have a physical board game, which is more for friends and families, for them to connect in person and have the kind of conversations that they want to have.
Interesting. Okay. I can go purchase the game, the board game, Cozy Juicy Real, and play it with my wife and 2 boys in a way that maybe is less awkward for me to be in the car on the way to school saying, hey, so tell me about something that's going on in your life, because I'm lacking questions to ask because they maybe feel uncomfortable. Can open the doors to communication. Is that correct? As
Definitely. How old are your boys?
15 and 16.
Oh, that'd be great. That would be super interesting. I think that one of the things people tell us while they're playing is they say, what I enjoyed is that you can let go of that inner dialogue of what do I have to say next?
Yes.
That happens a lot in conversation. So it takes the pressure off of what do I have to say next? What's my next question? How do I respond to that even? And the answer, I think you'd find to be really interesting to play with your teenage boys. And if you do, please let me know how it goes.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So I'm going to take that up. I definitely love to open up those lines of communication even more, because sometimes you get one word responses and you get different things, right? So that's interesting. And then to take it to the business element, for teams, divisions of teams, or small groups that work together, when would be a good time for them to consider, you know what, let's do some cozy, juicy reel and bring Jed in to help guide us through this process so that we can get deeper connection, more authenticity, and more vulnerability into our small group?
I would say the best time would be before before there's a big flare up, before the tension erupts into something bigger.
Trust is forming then?
Yeah, a lot of the calls that I get on, a lot of the times that people reach out is, wow, something big has happened in the company. We're experiencing a rift. There's something going on with leadership, and we need something to bring the team back in line. And so I would love to see teams reaching out before that happens as a proactive thing, because I think what they'd find is that they would hit those big rifts and those big tensions would erupt a lot less often. Yeah. If they prioritized building deeper trust and connection.
When you were talking earlier, Jed, about cozy questions, juicy questions, real questions, this should be easy, but I'm going to say I'm putting you on the spot here maybe for a second, but it should be an easy one for you. To me, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, cozy question is, hey, Jed, how's the weather in Spain? That's the way typically people on Zoom now, it's the best thing to do, right? How's the weather where you are? Is that what you mean by a cozy question, or can you give me a couple other examples?
Oh, wait a minute, John. You're inviting this. John, what is an example of a juicy question?
Hold on, we're still on cozy.
No, I want your example of a juicy. Like I want to walk you down this road that you started. Like, how's the weather in Spain? What's your opinion, John, of a juicy question? And then what's your opinion of a real question? Then we'll have Jed check off and say, yep, you got it, or you don't.
Okay. So just to be clear, you guys would be in agreement then that how's the weather is a cozy question. I just want to get that correct first.
For sure. Should I give you an example of a cozy question?
Yeah, give me another one.
Okay, so a cozy question, a question anybody can answer. What's something you love and something you don't love about your hometown, about wherever you live or where you grew up? Yeah. So that's an example. So it's beyond the weather question, but it's something that's not going to put anybody's defenses up.
Okay, got it. As opposed to
it's
the
more
inauthentic,
than
how's the weather? A little bit level deeper, which is what's really cool about where you live. I've never been to Spain. I want to go there with my wife next year. I know that's genuine. Where's the best place to go? Okay, I get that. So Rich just challenged me to, what do I think a juicy question is? And that's a good challenge. So I would say a juicy question would be, Jed, you moved from the US to Spain for a reason. I'm not exactly sure what that reason is, but it sounds pretty intriguing to me. Can you tell me more about that? Yeah. That'd be an example of a juicy question, which you may, through the answer of that, give me a couple of tidbits that may get me to ask you a real question. How did I do?
I think those are good examples. The way that I see juicy is it's the bridge between cozy and real. So the purpose of cozy is to dip people's toes in.
Okay.
The purpose of juicy is to get people to get into the water a little bit, feel what it's like. And then the purpose of real is to go out to the deep end, to swim out to the middle of the lake and have an experience there together.
Okay.
What's it like out here?
So can we role play this for a minute, just along this same exact example?
Happy to.
Jed, our 20th year anniversary, Amy and I, is next year. And I've talked about going to a country we've never been to, which is Spain. Mm-hmm. Tell me more about how you like it over there and where you think we should go.
I love it.
Which would be a cozy question. Is that right, Jed?
Yep.
Yeah, I'd put that in the.
Not a lot of vulnerability involved. Pretty cozy.
Yeah, we're talking about something other than me or my internal experience. But we may dip into my values as we speak. So we'll see. What I love about Spain are some things that are more on the cozy level. I love all the sunshine. I love the fresh food. You go to the grocery store and you look where all the food is grown. Spain, it's amazing. And because of it, the flavor, you can really taste the flavors in the tomatoes here. The culture is remarkably different. You walk down the street and there are people spending time together at outdoor cafes all times of day. And there's a higher value placed on relationship and leisure time, I think. Yeah. And so that in itself creates such a different feeling. So and don't get me wrong, I love the US. There's so many things about it that are super unique. And one of the things I love about the US is the sense of a deep ambition. You don't get that sense as much in Spain.
Yeah.
You get more a sense of we're content with the way things are. I'm making broad generalizations here, but sure, you can imagine how that would feel as a culture shift. So those are a couple of things that I love about being in Spain. And where would I recommend you come? Let's email after this. Okay, I would love to recommend some places.
Okay, awesome. That leads me to maybe a juicy question I'd like to ask you, which is, you left the US for a reason. And I know you're connected to the components you told me in Spain that really connect with you in terms of authentic relationships and togetherness of the community and things of that nature. But was there something deeper that drove you away from the US and said, you know what, I'd like to go over here and change my lifestyle and with my wife and live somewhere completely different from maybe where I may have friends and family and kind of go so far away from them? Is there anything there that drove you to make that decision?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had a business in the US, and like I was telling you before, I sold that business in 2014 and I left for 3 months. The plan was during that 3 months, I was going to come up with my next big business idea, come back to Portland, Oregon, and launch it. The business idea never came. And I continued to travel. I was working, traveling around, volunteering in India. And during those travels, I met Sophia, she's British and Cypriot from the island of Cyprus. And so a big draw to be in Europe is to be closer to her family. Yeah. Which comes with a trade-off of being further from my family. I don't get to see them as much as I'd like, but I absolutely love being here. And it's part of what we were talking about before with the difference in lifestyle. Yeah. But it in a lot of ways, it matches my values. It's a more socialist culture. There's free public healthcare for everyone. So there's things about it that really match my beliefs about what a country should look like. And those are the things that keep me here.
Okay. Thanks for sharing. That seemed both juicy and real to me. So I don't know where to go next because that was really deep of an answer. Rich, can you help me out?
Yeah, I think what I gathered from you, Jed, is juicy is inquiring about things that may uncover values. And real may be inquiring about some things that are an internal experience, versus cozy is neither of those. Is that ballpark how you might classify those, or would you classify those differently? And if that is, I think I have a good follow-up question that's a real one.
So the depths of the questions are based on NLP, if you've heard of neuro-linguistic programming, which is if Tony Robbins, the work that he really started off with is based on NLP. And something called the neurological level. So it's a depth of importance for personality, starting off with our basic surroundings, going towards skills and behaviors and identity, and then eventually to our connection to a higher power. Cozy, juicy, real. The cozy cards start off with things that are around your general settings, not as vulnerable. And as you get into the real deck, then you're going into things that are going to align with things that are more those touchstone memories that really inform our decisions today. So an example of a real question might be something like, of all the people I'm reading one now because I pulled up, of all the people who have positively influenced your character, who's someone that comes to mind and how have they affected you?
Down the same line of questioning, I think I have a real question for you, Jed, if you're up for it.
All right, as long as I can shoot them back at you guys.
For sure. How has your relationship with Sophia shifted since the move?
First, before you answer, Jed, I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a real question?
That's a real question. I would say any question that gets at a relationship and the inner workings of a relationship is going to be a real question.
Okay, love it.
So yeah, definitely a real question. The relationship has shifted a lot because of the move. And as you'd imagine, starting a business with your partner shifts a lot of things in a relationship as well. So I'll bring it to myself, moving to a new country for us is about finding your feet in a new community. And not only that, but if you can imagine in a community that doesn't necessarily speak your language, so there's a lot of discomfort that comes, especially the first few years. And you find, and again, bring it to myself, we found that we were relying on each other to fulfill a lot of those social roles that you might be turning to your brother or your best friend for, because they're there via Zoom only. And so as you're establishing community, you're heavily reliant on your partner. Yeah. So it's a stress on a relationship, and it was for us. And I'm grateful that we have an amazing couples therapist that we've been working with for a couple of years who actually specializes in expat couples.
Oh, wow.
So I found that our struggles are not unique. And the struggles of couples that launch businesses together are, I think, in a lot of ways not unique. You've got to define your roles and figure out what you're good at and what you're going to take on and what your partner's going to take on and how you want to work together and how to differentiate that from the relationship.
Thank you for giving such a real answer. That's certainly a wide open, included vulnerability, just like the promise of the game, right? When you get the real questions, it's going to go a level deeper. And thanks for the gift you gave us of demonstrating what that looks like.
I'm happy to. And I'm ready to ask you guys a question. Either of you can answer it.
Yeah,
or both.
I think that's fair. Can you ask a question that is straight away off of one of the decks? And then if you want to go all real, that seems fair given the question I just asked you. Or if you just ask a question off of one of the decks and John and I will guess, is that a cozy, juicy, or a real question, and then answer it?
Oh, I like that.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask two questions and I'm going to give you guys the choice, which one you want to answer. You might both choose to answer the same one. One is something that is from the game. And the other one I'm coming up with off the cuff because being a parent is something that has come up during this conversation. And the question about being a parent is, how has the stepping into the role of fatherhood shifted the way that you think about yourself and the world around you?
Wow. I'll take that one.
All right.
And I'll go first. I think that's a juicy question. I think I'd like to have clarification before I answer because
that's
it really
a real
uncovers the
question, by
values
the
of
way.
myself. How did I do versus the inner workings of a relationship? But,
yeah, I would go with real. I came up with that off the cuff, so it's not in a deck, but I would put that in the real deck.
Okay. All right. So you're gonna ask me a real question before you cozy me up? That's not very cool.
This whole thing.
All right. Now we've already cozied up. I think for me, Jed and Rich, it was, and Rich knows this from just having known me for 25 years. The moment I realized that it's my turn to be a role model to these two young beings, just like my father was to me, versus the Johnny Vegas party guy, that was a big, significant shift for me. And realizing that I didn't want to do anything ever to have them be disappointed in me or not look up to me. I wanted to be a role model that they could look up to, like I do again to my father, and be like, you know what? That's the foundation of who I am and who I want to be. And that was a monumental shift from prior to getting married and having kids, right? It's a big shift to have those young beings looking up at me. Yeah, that feels like a real question. And that would be my answer.
I'm happy
Thank
to
you.
take the same question if you want, Jed.
No, that's not fair. I think you need to get a different question and see if you can get if it's juicy, real, or cozy.
Jed, call the shot here. You're the decision maker on, is it a different question or do you want the same question answered? There's clearly a discrepancy between the hosts that you're going to need to settle.
Yeah, I'm going to settle it. I'm going to settle. At first, I was going to say I'm going to let you two duke it out, but no, I'll settle it. I think, Rich, because you were drawn to the question, I think that's the one you should answer.
Okay. I would say one of the things that shifted for me in being a parent is prior to that, well, I still am very clear on my life's mission, which is to lead a mass of people for their performance to match their potential for a purpose which they determine. I developed that early on, I think, when John and I started working together in our early 20s, and that has held true. And it's been a guiding factor of how I practice continuous improvement and work with others. So I brought that obviously to the workplace day after day after day. I am a step parent of 3 and an original parent of 1, but I treat them all the same. So when I moved out to Iowa, and I immediately moved out and received 3 kids that I started living with, and they were the ages of 4, 8, and 11. And I'm coming from this life construct of I'm helping people, their performance to match their potential. And I was very in the same way because I like to be the same person, whether I'm at work, I'm with my family. I don't change what I bring very often. So I was bringing that and didn't even realize that I was bringing that. And I was having teenagers read like How to Win Friends and Influence People because I thought, gosh, the sooner you read this book, the sooner you can start applying it. And even Think and Grow Rich in their late teens, like time to read that. That's a great timing. Get ahead of the game. And the kids were not always very receptive to these things. And I found it really frustrating to start with. And I thought, oh man, I'm working with people at my work and really drawing the best out of them. And why am I not able to do the same thing with my very own family? That's frustrating. So you mentioned seeing a therapist. So my wife and I saw a therapist, and in this case, it wasn't for our relationship. It was for how we were parenting. And it was one of the things I brought to the therapist was, this is frustrating. Like, I want to do more. I want to give more, and they're not receiving everything that I want to offer. And the therapist gave me some really good advice that shifted how I parent. And it also shifted how I'm a friend. And it also shifted how I work with some people in business now. What the therapist said was, at your work, you're measured by how able you are. At home with your family, it's not about being able. It's about being available. It's about being present. It's about being there. It's about enjoying the moment with them. It's not about exercising your ability and being able. It's about being available and just being with them. That shifted how I wanted to parent. It wasn't as much about wanting to drive for bringing out the best potential, and it was just being together. And it was as much providing direction and wanting to counterbalance that with having a lot more fun than direction, because I started balancing in the wrong direction because that was who I was. And it was not a slow warm up to being a parent. It was a very fast warm up to being a parent of 3 and now 4. And I couldn't be happier, but it did shift how I look at the world and how I look at how I bring myself to the world.
Yeah, thank you both so much for answering. If we were playing the game, I would give you both courage cards.
I love that. Thank you.
I appreciate how real both of you got. And I'm sure that I feel closer having heard what you've just shared. And I know your listeners would as well, because it's something that people can relate to, is that authenticity.
Yeah.
And
No.
what a great example of where questions like these are able to draw some of that out and draw connection. And if we weren't on this podcast playing with the idea of this game that does it, we never would have gotten there. And it's a great endorsement to what it is that you do and how you bring that to both families and friends, but also in the workplace, and the importance of what you had said, which is starting to eliminate some of the ease of inauthenticity and create real connection and relationships. And you're driven to do that in what you do. As we look to close our conversation with you, what would be one thing that you would like to leave with our listeners that you would hope if they listen to the podcast, they hear Jed of Cozy Juicy Real, and there's one thing they remember that sticks with them? What would you want that to be?
Ask the tough question. And this is something that I work on still to this day. When I'm having a conversation with someone, I'll notice a curiosity internally come up. And then I'll have this second voice that will come up and say, no, you can't go there. That's not, you're going to put the person, you're going to make them uncomfortable. It's not appropriate to ask, whatever it is. But if you ask that question and you frame it in a sensitive way, I think your listeners will find, as I've found, which is that people are so grateful for it because they're yearning for it. They're just waiting for somebody to ask that question. So if there's something you're curious about another person, just let that out. Don't hold back.
That's great. Thank you so much for being on with us today, Jed. It's been a pleasure.
On this side as well. Thanks, guys.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
John, I had talked to Jed before, and I've obviously done that experience, and I enjoyed it, and it was one of the reasons I brought him on the podcast, obviously. I didn't think of what he had talked about in terms of how does he categorize what's cozy, what's juicy, and what's real. When he breaks us down into the neuro-linguistic programming, it really makes me think at the depth of importance and moving from surrounding and settings all the way to this depth of identity and so forth. It makes me feel really clumsy about questions that I've asked in the past and not really being aware or maybe sensitive enough about the buildup from cozy to juicy and real. And as if I were going to be blamed of something, it wouldn't be building too much small talk, the cozy questions. It would be wanting to jump to the real questions, maybe even too soon in a relationship, or me not knowing what to ask in just small talk type conversations. So I really feel like this helped educate me so that I can have more awareness on what level of depth am I asking at, and to be more sensitive about stair stepping maybe some relationships into the real questions instead of starting them there.
Yeah. Rich, if I may, and our closeness and friendship may provide for this, we've known each other for 25 years, and you still make me feel uncomfortable when you ask me real questions because you don't warm me up. Because you have that propensity to just bang, I'm going to ask you that out of the blue, out of nowhere. You'll ask me a hard question sometimes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, really? You're like, we're going that deep right now? And that's one of your best assets, but you certainly could work on those warm-up skills a little bit. And what I love about the way that you do Cozy, Juicy, Real is you don't have to go too far to ask a couple of questions to ultimately get to ask the question you want and have that person in that more comfortable environment to be like, you know what, now that you ask, here's where we are. And it reminds me back to when we were doing interviewing skills and we were taught how to interview, and you'd never come out on the first question of the interview and ask them this deep-rooted question you've been meaning to ask them, right? You'd ask them, tell me a little bit more about your resume. Or you'd then get to maybe a more juicy reel about a situation or why they got fired from a job. And then you go deeper into the deep question, and then you have to sew them back up afterwards, right? In terms of if you went too deep, bringing it back, because that deep question could be an emotional question. And that's something we didn't talk about. I guess I would have liked to ask is, he said, don't be afraid to ask the real question. But I'm assuming he would subscribe to, but you can't ask it before the cozy and the juicy question. Is that true?
I think you're right.
Okay.
I think you're right. And you're right on just my preference, right? Like you go to a conference or you go to a summit and you stand in line at the bar line and the person next to you don't know. And what do you talk about? Especially day one. So when did you get in? Where are you from? What do you do? And I don't like those questions. You know, the question I want to ask, and this isn't every time, I'm just an example of the question I want to ask out of the gate, John, is the person behind me or in front of me, we make eye contact and I want to get right to it. I want to be like, hey, so where were you in the birth order in your family and how do you think that impacted your personality?
Yeah. That's a little uncomfortable.
I want to talk real talk. And I'm not that bad. You got to give me some credit. I'm not that bad. But if I could go there that quickly, that's where I'd rather be, is literally really connecting with people instead of talking about how was your flight. Nobody, when you say, how was your flight? What do you actually, oh, it's fine. Oh, there's zero connection to questions like that.
First of all, I am going to agree with you. You're not that bad. However, when you really do know somebody, you will come out with those wild questions out of the blue, out of nowhere on the whim. When you know them that well, you won't if you don't know them that well. When you don't know them that well, you may go to the juicy question right away, but not the real question.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say in this conversation too, and I don't know if I really got the answer. I don't think, how's the weather in Iowa? How are you today? How was your
It's not even a
weekend?
cozy question.
I don't even think it's a cozy question. I think it's an inauthentic question. I think it's the ease of inauthenticity question.
Yes, you're right.
That's the ease of, I don't know what to say right now. So instead of being authentic, I'm going to spew some crap on the ground because I don't know what to say. That's not a cozy question. That's a you're asking me because you don't know what to say question.
Yeah. You're
right.
You know what? One of the places where I found this of a lot of value and where I think I'm going to take it into our business, John, is when you think of the 5 dysfunctions of a team that we've talked about on the podcast before, where it starts with vulnerability-based trust on the bottom of that pyramid is the graphic it's often shown in. It starts with trust, then it goes to conflict, then it goes to commitment, then it goes to accountability, and then it goes to results. But the bottom of that pyramid is trust, vulnerability-based trust. Otherwise, everything falls down if you don't have that. This for my team, when we had that offsite of 10 people, it got us into that vulnerability-based trust area really easily in a game type format where as the leader of the group, I didn't have to be creative. I didn't have to look in a book. I didn't have to do research online. I didn't have to do anything. It made it really easy to develop trust on the team at an offsite. And I could see this really being a nice angle for leadership teams in particular to use Cozy Juicy Real, just like I did in our offsite, as a trust development exercise. And it may take an hour or two out of the offsite, but most vulnerability-based trust time blocks in an offsite take at least an hour or two, if not longer. So I think it'd be a valuable place for leadership teams to use it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the additional development for me into this is, I don't want to repeat it again, but the more I think about it, teaching people to not be inauthentic with their questions. And there's something else that we learned, Rich, that's coming to mind right off the bat, which is when somebody asks you a question, how you should answer a question with a question to also have interest in them. So, for example, if you asked me a question, a cozy question, and I answer it, then you may ask me a juicy question and I answer, and then you ask me a deeper question and I answer, and we just keep going down my rabbit hole. And I think in reality, the best building of trust and relationships is if you ask me a cozy question, I answer it, but respond back with a cozy question back to you. And there's a dialogue conversation that starts pursuing, right?
Yeah, difference between a conversation and what can feel like an inquiry.
An interview.
Right? Yeah.
Because I can certainly see these real questions being interview-ish from really trying to understand the inner workings of the relationships that you've had and deep into your mental, physical, heart, everything state. So that was interesting to me. But I do feel this would be, I guess, one of my last thoughts here is the amount of times I want to ask a question and I don't, just like Jed talked about, like that happens to me a lot. And part of it is I just don't want that person to feel uncomfortable. But if I ask them a cozy question and then a juicy question, and they may get to the point where I could just tell they're comfortable to answer the other question. I felt I was insecurity in me, but I wanted to ask them a real question out of the gate. But if I ask them the questions before it, I may actually get to ask them the question I really want to ask them in a comfortable environment.
I think this is something we can also consider to use on our podcast, is consider the level of depth of question that we're asking our guest and to walk them through cozy, then juicy, and then maybe real, and be aware of where in the depth of importance we're asking. But one of the things that can continue, I think, to make our podcast interesting is that we do get to the real questions where we're asking about the in depth in someone's identity and their internal experience. I think it is important that we continue to go there. Yep. And just have the warm up along as we get there. So I think this will not only help me and my question asking or rapport building, but I think it'll also help us on our podcast as well.
Yeah, no doubt.